Welcome. Today we're doing a deep dive into market research, specifically how we interpret it and maybe more importantly, how to dodge those pitfalls that, can lead to some pretty expensive mistakes.
hmm
We've gathered insights to really sharpen your understanding, help you leverage that market data effectively.
Yeah, our mission today really is to give you that critical lens.
Exactly.
We're going to look at some common traps like the danger of focusing on too narrow a group
Right.
and why context, time, external factors is just so crucial.
And the risks of old data.
That's a big one.
Huge. It can actively mislead you. We'll also dig into data quality, why it's paramount, and how to actually make sure you're drawing accurate conclusions.
Because getting it wrong, well, it has real consequences, doesn't it? For any business.
Definitely. Significant ones.
Absolutely. And just to underline why this matters so much, get this. Nielsen's Global Trust in Advertising report. It says 92% of consumers trust recommendations from peers, people like them, way more than traditional ads.
Yow, 92%.
Yep.
92. Let's let that sink in. The huge majority value peer opinions over company messages.
That really screams how vital it is to have a genuine, accurate pulse on what consumers really think and want.
It really does. Okay, so let's unpack this. Maybe start with a fundamental piece.
Yeah.
Who exactly are you listening to?
It's surprisingly easy for businesses to think they get their whole market based on, well, a pretty limited view.
Hmm.
Our sources really stress this danger of what we call narrow samples.
Okay.
So imagine a company, right? They only collect feedback from their most loyal customers.
Super fans.
Exactly, the super fans. They might get glowing reviews, which feels great,
Sure.
but it tells them absolutely nothing about potential customers they're not reaching or, why other people might be choosing a competitor.
Yeah, it's like only asking your mom if your new haircut looks good. You're probably going to get a biased answer.
Precisely.
And that point about just asking loyalists or maybe
Yeah.
people in just one city and thinking that applies everywhere.
Yeah.
It's so common. You're basically like turning a blind eye to potentially huge chunks of the market.
You really are. And think about what you might be missing. You could be overlooking whole customer segments with totally different needs or preferences or problems your loyal base just doesn't have.
Right.
And that translates directly into missed opportunities, chances to grow, develop new things, or even spot threats that your fans aren't seeing.
Okay, so what's the alternative? What should businesses be doing?
Well, the material we looked at really hammers home the need for diverse samples.
Makes sense.
You have to actively go out and get input from a broad mix demographics, different behaviors, various locations, just to get a realistic picture.
And it's not just about getting more responses, is it? It's about the type of information, too.
Oh, absolutely. Not just quantity. If you think about building like a complete understanding, just relying on numbers, the quantitative stuff,
Yeah.
it often gives you an incomplete story. Quantitative tells you what's happening. Sales are up, website visits dropped.
Hmm.
But qualitative data, like doing in-depth interviews or running focus groups, that can tell you why.
The why behind the what.
Exactly. Combining those gives you a much richer, sort of more nuanced understanding. It seriously cuts down the risk of jumping to the wrong conclusion based on just one slice of data.
Gotcha. Like a survey might show satisfaction dropped for a feature.
Right, but maybe some follow-up interviews reveal it's not the feature itself. It could be that a recent change in the user guide made it confusing, something you'd never see just looking at the satisfaction score.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
So hear from diverse people, combine the what's and the why. Good start. But our sources also highlight that data doesn't live in a vacuum, right? Let's talk about context.
Yeah, this is where understanding the timing and just the general circumstances becomes absolutely critical.
Okay.
Market trends, consumer behavior, they're not static. They shift constantly. Think about seasonality.
Obvious example, yeah.
Of course, you'll sell more winter coats in, say, November. But if you only looked at those peak numbers,
Uh-oh.
you might wrongly assume that demand stays high all year. And then you make some pretty terrible inventory decisions based on that.
That's such a clear illustration. The source material mentions exactly that misinterpreting a holiday sales spike as some kind of long-term growth trend.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to see a jump and think, great, this is the new normal. And then, like you said, reality bites later.
Precisely. You just have to evaluate findings within the right temporal context. When was this data gathered? What was the economy like then? Any, I don't know, big cultural things happening?
Yeah.
Ignoring those surrounding factors means you might misread what's really driving the numbers, and then you build strategies on, well, shaky ground.
Right. Because what was true even a few months back, maybe even weeks, might be totally different now. Which leads us neatly into another key point from the sources. The danger of using outdated market research.
Oh, definitely.
It's not just understanding the now, but knowing when your info is basically expired milk.
It's quite stark how quickly market research can lose its value. Markets today move so fast. Consumer tastes flip, new tech pops up, competitors are always tweaking things. If your decisions rely on old data, you're essentially using a map of a place that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, the example in the source really brings this home. A company keeps pushing some old product feature that nobody cares about anymore,
Right.
while totally missing what customers are actually asking for now. It's like, I don't know, insisting on using a fax machine when everyone else is emailing.
Exactly. And the knock-on effects can be pretty severe. You might be pouring money and effort into areas that just aren't relevant anymore.
Wasted resource.
Totally. And missing out on new opportunities or failing to react to new threats from competitors. New players arrive, rivals change prices, some new tech disrupts everything.
Right.
If your research isn't keeping up, you're going to get blindsided. It's inevitable.
So the big takeaway here really is that market research isn't a do it once and forget it kind of thing.
Not at all.
It has to be like continuous,
Yeah.
an ongoing effort.
Yes, constantly updating your information to reflect what's actually happening now. That's how you stay competitive. How often are you actually revisiting and refreshing your market analysis? That continuous loop is vital.
Right, a continuous loop. Okay, so you've got up-to-date data, you're looking at it in context.
Mm.
But what if the data itself is just bad? Let's dig into data quality.
Yeah, that's fundamental. If you think about it, your market research, it's basically the foundation for your strategy. If that foundation is cracked or built with shoddy materials,
Yeah.
Low quality data, then the whole structure you build on top is at risk.
So what defines high-quality data then?
Well, it needs to be precise, reliable, and actually relevant to the questions you're trying to answer.
And the opposite, poor quality data. That's just inviting disaster, isn't it? The sources are clear. It leads straight to wrong conclusions, flawed strategies. Yep. You could be making huge calls based on info that's just plain wrong.
How does data end up being poor quality?
Oh, lots of ways. It could be how it was gathered. Maybe the sample wasn't truly representative.
We've talked about earlier.
Exactly. Or the survey questions were leading, or maybe just unclear, or even just inconsistencies in how the data got recorded. The example given is a survey that just doesn't reach a diverse enough group, so you get a warped view of the market.
It's also about where the data comes from in the first place, right? The sources stress using trustworthy current sources.
Absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
Just grabbing numbers from anywhere without checking if they're reliable. That's incredibly risky.
Could send you way off track.
Completely. So, to make sure you have high-quality data, the sources recommend things like using validated research methods, cross-checking info with different sources, basically always prioritizing accuracy. And investing in decent data collection tools and platforms can make a big difference, too. So it's not just about lots of data. It's about good data. Critical difference. Okay, so let's say you have good current data, diverse sample, right time frame. But there's still another hurdle. Making sure you're interpreting it correctly in context. It's not just when and who, but also like how the data was gathered.
Yeah, this brings us back to some of the nuances of research. Like the sources point out, the specific timing can still color your interpretation, even if the data is recent.
How so?
Well, was there some unique, short-term event happening that maybe temporarily boosted interest in your product?
Ah, okay, like a flash sale or a news mention.
Exactly, is what you're seeing a real long-term shift, or just a blip caused by something temporary.
Got it. You need to look past just the raw figures
Yeah,
and the methods used. They can introduce bias too, can't they?
definitely. The way you word questions in a survey, even the order you ask them in, all that can subtly influence how people answer.
So how do you guard against that?
Well, it raises a vital point about designing your research to be as objective as possible. Using standardized approaches, carefully crafting your survey questions, that's essential to minimize bias and make sure the data is reliable. And it's not just the tools, the people doing the work are critical too.
That's a really important angle. The sources mentioned training the teams involved.
Yes. If the people collecting and analyzing the data aren't properly trained, they might maybe unintentionally introduce their own biases or just misread the findings.
Right. So a well-trained team is better at gathering accurately.
Understanding the data's limits and interpreting it in the right context, which at the end of the day leads to much more dependable insights.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of potential pitfalls.
Hmm.
Narrow samples, ignoring context, old data, misinterpreting how it was collected.
Huh.
Let's talk about the bottom line. What actually happens when businesses get this wrong? What are the real-world consequences?
Well, if we connect it all up, getting market research wrong can cause this ripple effect of negative outcomes.
Uh,
One of the most direct impacts, misallocating resources.
Wasting money.
Exactly. Imagine sinking a ton of cash into a marketing campaign based on a completely flawed idea of what your customers actually want or how they behave.
Yeah.
You're basically just throwing money at strategies that aren't going to work.
The example in the material is spot on. Spending big on a campaign using incorrect customer behavior data. That hits the bottom line directly.
Mm-hmm.
And as the source notes, for smaller businesses especially, those kinds of financial losses can be absolutely brutal.
Devastating, potentially. But it goes beyond just the immediate financial hit. Misinterpreting research can seriously damage a company's reputation, too.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you consistently miss the mark on meeting customer needs because your understanding is off,
People get annoyed.
right, customers get frustrated, dissatisfied. That leads to negative reviews online, people stop being loyal, and suddenly your brand image is tarnished. And that's really hard to fix.
It all ties together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you misunderstand the research, you might end up miscommunicating what your product even offers, your core value.
Precisely. If you don't truly grasp what customers need and how you solve that, you can't talk about your value effectively.
And that just erodes trust and loyalty even further.
Exactly. And in today's world, negative word of mouth spreads like wildfire online. So misinterpreting research can kick off this chain reaction that's expensive and really difficult to stop.
Wow. Okay, so bringing it back, we started with that really striking stat, 92% trust peer recommendations. Let's just quickly dive a bit deeper into that fast fact again.
Yeah, it's interesting. What that really highlights is just how critical it is to genuinely understand your customers, their actual experiences, their honest opinions, what they're saying to each other.
Mhm.
If people trust peers so much more than ads, then having accurate consumer data is even more vital for shaping your marketing. You need to know what those peer conversations are actually about.
Right. What drives the good recommendations versus the bad ones?
Exactly. And how can you authentically, be part of that positive conversation?
It really emphasizes the power of word of mouth, doesn't it?
Immense power.
And that relies completely on genuine customer satisfaction, understanding their needs first, which loops right back to needing accurate market research.
Precisely. If you ignore this, rely on assumptions or bad data, you just miss huge opportunities to nurture those positive peer recommendations that carry so much weight.
Okay, so we've walked through the dangers of narrow samples, the absolute necessity of context, the risks of old info, the non-negotiable need for good data, how to interpret carefully, and the serious fallout from getting it wrong. That's quite a bit to keep in mind.
It is, but it's all essential if you want to effectively understand your market.
So maybe, for everyone listening, a final thought to consider.
Mm-hmm.
How do you currently look at the market research you use or conduct?
Mm-hmm. And maybe what's one single change you could implement, like right now, to improve how you interpret it and make better strategic calls?
Could it be about deliberately seeking out more diverse voices in your data?
Or maybe paying closer attention to the specific timing and context?
Or just being a bit more critical about the sources you trust? And perhaps take a moment to really question the hidden assumptions that might be coloring how you see the data. Are you making logical leaps that aren't actually backed up by the research itself?
Yeah, it's often those unspoken assumptions that can steer us wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
My pleasure.
Until our next exploration.